It was a crime that shocked America.
Did you and your brother kill your mother and father?
Yes.
They said they were the victims.
My dad had been molesting me.
But what was the real truth?
We had reason to believe that Eric may have been gay.
Their sensational trial changed American justice forever.
Eric and La Menendez clearly killed their parents for greed.
Behind the facade of the American dream, the Menendez brothers, tonight on Power, Privilege, and Justice.
Jose Menendez seemed to have it all. A spectacular mansion in Beverly Hills, a glamorous job in the entertainment industry, and a beautiful family.
They were good looking. I mean, Kitty Menendez was a beauty queen. Jose Menendez was a buff, hot Cuban guy. And their sons were a good mix of the two of them.
They had money, they had power, they lived in a beautiful place, and they had a very promising future.
But on the evening of August 20th, 1989, everything Jose Menendez had achieved was about to come to a brutal and sudden end. At 10 o'clock, Jose and Kitty were just settling down in their TV room with a bowl of ice cream when their two sons burst in. Lyle and Eric fired 13 shotgun blasts into them. 1.5 hours later, the boys returned to the house at 722 North Elm Drive and called the police to report that their parents had been murdered. The scene shocked even veteran police detectives.
Looked like a war zone. I mean, it was one of the worst crime scenes that I'd ever seen.
You would never expect a crime like this in Beverly Hills. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I think they have one murder a year.
I used to live a few blocks away from 722 North Elm Drive. The Menendez house was big and beautiful on the outside, but inside there was nothing but despair, fear, and greed, and the hatred that leads to murder.
The murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez was so violent that at first police thought it might be the work of professional criminals, the mafia or Colombian drug dealers. But gradually, suspicions focused on the two privileged boys at the center of the crime and the dark secrets of the Menendez family. Jose Menendez was born into the elite world of Havana high society. The Menendez family was socially prominent. They were known for their good looks, their athletic gifts, and their brilliance at business. Jose grew up confident that to be a Menendez was to be the best.
There was a drive for excellence and a need to achieve, a sense of entitlement, privilege.
But in 1960, that world of privilege disappeared almost overnight. Revolution was sweeping Cuba, and Jose was sent to live with an aunt in the small town of Hazleton, Pennsylvania.
He came over at the age of 15 years old, and an immigrant, and he just said, "I'm going to make it."
Young Jose was determined to regain what he had lost. A star swimmer in high school, Jose went to Southern Illinois University on an athletic scholarship. There he met a quiet, attractive girl named Mary Louise Anderson, known to her friends as Kitty. She was a straight A student and a beauty pageant winner. She was just what Jose was looking for. In 1963, they married, moved to New York, and started a family. The couple's first child was Joseph Lyle, born in 1968. Eric came 3 years later. While Kitty stayed home with the children, Jose devoted himself to work.
Jose was a driven man. He knew what he wanted and he went after it. Jose was a brilliant man.
Jose rose quickly in business. By 1973, he was chief financial officer at the Hertz Corporation. He was smart, hardworking, and aggressive.
So we think 1989 will be a tremendous year on a pro forma basis. I think we will be very happy with the growth of the company.
I think he believed that he was smarter than most of the people around him. He is a person who was not reluctant to criticize his subordinates in public, and he was extremely demanding.
His hard-charging style paid off. By the time he was 41, he was Chief Operating Officer of RCA Records. The family moved to an estate in Princeton, New Jersey, complete with a tennis court. Lyle and Eric were gifted athletes, and Jose was grooming them to be tennis champions. He enrolled them at the exclusive Princeton Day School. One day, Jose dreamed his sons would go to Princeton University.
I think that what Princeton University stood for, Jose, was the WASP establishment, part of something that was such a dream for him.
But Lyle and Eric weren't good students, and neither seemed to have Jose's drive. Lyle was shy and had trouble making friends. Eric was more social, but he liked being with friends more than studying. But Jose had made himself a success, and he wanted nothing less for his sons.
Nothing would have been good enough for Jose Menendez. He wanted these boys to be his trophies, basically, and to become the best of everything. And if they weren't, he would make them into that.
Jose would often test Lyle and Eric on what they had learned in school, spur-of-the-moment quizzes that could quickly take an ugly turn.
He would sit nose to nose with them, and if they missed any question or they didn't give the right answer, he would shake them, he would yell at them, or he would slap them.
I think they feared him enormously.
I had since talked to many people who said, yeah, I've met Jose Menendez. He was like one of the most horrible people on earth. He was brutal, and he raised two kids capable of murder. So what more can you say about a guy? His wife was a victim.
He had a girlfriend for years. Kitty did suspect that Jose was having an affair. I know that it bothered her to a point where she went and saw a psychologist.
She was very depressed, suicidal, taking medications. She couldn't be a mother because she was too busy being the wife of this monster.
But on the surface, the Menendez family seemed happy and successful. When Lyle was accepted into Princeton University, anything seemed possible. Jose hoped to create a dynasty. His sons would inherit his money and his success.
He wanted Lyle to be cut in his own image. He was going to be the heir. He was going to be the one that carried on the tradition. He would be the Menendez man.
Jose continued his climb upwards. He became president of Live Entertainment, a video distribution company based in Los Angeles. With the job came a salary of over $1 million and an important move to the Los Angeles suburbs. In Hollywood, Jose liked to boast of his son at Princeton, but within a few months, Lyle was suspended for cheating. Lyle returned to L.A., where he soon got into more trouble. He and Eric began burglarizing their neighbors' houses for kicks. The brothers broke into 2 different homes, stealing over $100,000 in cash and property.
They weren't just stealing a couple things, they cleaned out a house.
Lyle and Eric were driving with the stolen goods in the trunk when they were pulled over for speeding. The boys were arrested. Lyle now faced prison. Jose sprung into action. He had Eric, a minor, lie and take the blame, and paid his son's victims $11,000.
They were both learning that if you had money, you could buy your way out of scrapes that they got involved in.
As part of Eric's probation, he was ordered to see a psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel.
Jose wanted to know everything that Eric told Dr. Oziel, and Oziel said, okay. After that, Eric kept his problems to himself. He'd have to find another way to work them out.
Jose was embarrassed that the boys had burglarized his neighbors. He immediately moved the family into a $4 million mansion at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills.
The children, in their each individual way, they were both great disappointments to Mr. Menendez, to Jose. I think that Lyle was too shy, too withdrawn, and Eric was a bit effeminate. They just didn't fit the mold or the image that Joe had for what they should become.
Jose was finally being forced to admit that Lyle and Eric were never going to be what he wanted. Jose decided to rewrite his will and cut the boys out of his $14 million estate. It was a fateful decision.
With a Beverly Hills mansion and a $1 million Hollywood job, Jose Menendez had made himself a success, but his sons, Lyle and Eric, were disappointments. He told the brothers he had decided to cut them out of his will. What happened next would shock Beverly Hills and the nation.
Only weeks later, on August 20th, at 11:47 at night, the Beverly Hills 911 operator received a panicked phone call. On the other end of the line was Lyle Menendez. He was hysterical.
What's the problem? What's the problem? Someone killed my parents. Someone killed my parents. What? Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad. Your mom and dad? My mom and dad. Okay, hold on a second.
Minutes later, Lyle and Eric also called their tennis coach, Mark Heffernan.
Both of them were crying into this phone, and Lyle was saying, "Our father's dead, our father's dead. And can you come over?"
Heffernan rushed over to help and found the police already on the scene.
Lyle was talking to a policeman on the sidewalk, and Eric was in a fetal position in the middle of Elm Avenue.
Beverly Hills detective Les Zoller was at 722 North Elm Drive that night.
When I walked into the room and, the television was on and, there was blood and body parts all over the place.
Lyle and Eric were taken down to the Beverly Hills police station for questioning. Both boys appeared to be overwhelmed with grief.
The emotional outpouring from both of the boys seemed so legitimate and so genuine that I think it was part of the initial compromise of the police investigation.
Lyle and Eric told the police that the killers might have been members of the mafia Jose was doing business with. While the detectives looked into possible mafia connections, the bodies of Jose and Kitty Menendez were flown to Princeton for a memorial service.
The service itself seemed very somber and sincere to me. They both appeared to break down. The reception was shortly after the service, and it was something that I think was extremely awkward because they were able to switch off the grief and turn into hosts of a party.
I heard a very revealing story about Lyle from Mitzi Eisenberg, Jose's assistant. She was riding in the limo with Lyle after the service, and Lyle said to her, "I'm filling my father's shoes." Mitzi told him he could make his own way in the world. Lyle said, "You don't understand," pointing to his feet. He said, "These literally are my father's shoes."
As soon as their parents were buried, Lyle and Eric, with money from Jose's company, went on a spending spree. The brothers bought Rolex watches and designer clothing. Lyle bought a $64,000 Porsche, and Eric a new Jeep. Eventually, they rented luxury apartments in a Marina del Rey high-rise, and they put their tennis coach, Mark Heffernan, on the payroll for $72,000 a year.
We hired an Olympic weight training coach for them. We had a complete nutritional profile done on them, hair analysis, protein sampling with a metabolic nutritionist. They had their volume of oxygen uptake measured, their flexibility, obviously, strength. All of these things were measured.
And they just started spending money. And that just didn't seem like the way to grieve over the loss of your parents, is to start spending their money.
The police had ruled out the mob and were beginning to suspect Lyle and Eric. But the brothers weren't worried about getting caught. With his judgmental father gone, a newly confident Lyle decided to go into business. He bought a fast food restaurant in Princeton for $550,000 and started flying back and forth to L.A.
After the murders, Lyle just kept buying stuff. He didn't seem to have any conscience at all. Eric seemed to suffer. He lost a lot of weight. He couldn't sleep. Eric seemed to be affected by what he'd done.
I'd find him crying a few times, or, you know, really sad, depressed.
While Lyle was playing at business in Princeton, in California, Eric was starting to break down emotionally.
I think if Lyle had committed these murders by himself and Eric knew nothing about it, Lyle might have gotten away with it and never told a soul. But Eric had to get it off his chest. He had a conscience.
To get it off his chest, Eric turned to his old psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel.
Eric went in and talked to Dr. Oziel and actually copped out to Dr. Oziel that he and Lyle had murdered his parents.
By now, Lyle had returned to L.A. He was furious when he found out Eric had confessed.
I think that if he wanted to commit the perfect murder, he never should have involved his little brother, because his little brother wasn't like him.
When Lyle found out that Eric had confessed to Dr. Oziel, he was furious. But Oziel was able to turn the situation around. Pretty soon, he had Lyle confiding in him too. Lyle eventually told him that he had committed the perfect murder, and his father would have been proud of him.
Eventually, Oziel was able to convince Lyle and Eric to let him tape their confessions. It was those tapes that would prove to be the downfall of the Menendez brothers. Lyle and Eric Menendez thought they had committed the perfect crime when they killed their parents. But within months, the brothers had confessed to psychologist Jerome Oziel.
Who cares if it's perfect if you can't brag about it? You know? And once you brag about it, it's no longer the perfect murder.
But the police learned about the tapes and got them from Oziel. And once they heard them, there was no doubt who had killed Jose and Kitty. On March 8, 1990, arrest warrants were issued for Lyle and Eric Menendez. Lyle was arrested outside his parents' Beverly Hills mansion. Eric was at a tennis tournament in Israel with his coach.
We got a call at 6 in the morning from Lyle's attorney saying, "You have to get on an LL flight immediately and get home."
But Eric and Heffernan did not fly straight back to Los Angeles. They went to London instead.
But we spent just a couple of days together there trying to calm him for pending jail. We did a lot of walking, saw a little bit of the city. We went to some nice restaurants.
The story I heard was that Eric was a mess, crying, out of control. Heffernan told him, "Don't worry, this will all get cleared up and you'll be out of jail in no time." That calmed Eric down. He must have wanted to believe it.
3 days later, Eric returned to Los Angeles and was arrested at the airport for first-degree murder. Lyle and Eric now had to make the most important purchase of their lives, a defense. Jill Lansing agreed to represent Lyle. The brothers' family wanted Leslie Abramson to defend Eric.
They went to Leslie Abramson, who said, "I will take this case, but I want $1 million on the table before I take it." Carlos Barral said, "But we don't have $1 million in cash in that estate." She said, "Well, you better get it, because if you don't, these kids will fry."
On March 26, 1990, the Menendez brothers appeared in court to answer charges of murder in the first degree.
The first appearance of the brothers was in Beverly Hills Municipal Court.
Mr. Eric Galen Menendez, do you understand the charges against you?
I understand both of them, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Joseph Lyle Menendez, do you understand the charges against you?
Yes.
It was almost like a joke to them.
For the next 3 years, while Lyle and Eric were in jail, their lawyers tried to keep the confession tapes out. When the tapes were ruled admissible, the defense immediately changed its plea to guilty. Now, Lyle and Eric admitted they killed their parents, but they claimed it was self-defense.
We have evidence that will prove that they were experiencing fear, that they were in imminent danger of death or great bodily injury at the hands of their parents.
Abramson said Kitty and Jose had been abusing Lyle and Eric for years, emotionally, physically, and sexually. Pitted against Abramson was a young, tough prosecutor, Pamela Bozanich. She said there was no abuse. The brothers had acted out of greed.
This is a case of People versus Joseph Lyle Menendez, and the jurors are all back. Welcome. Good morning.
Judge Stanley Weisberg decided there would be a separate jury for each brother, but the cases would be tried together. He also allowed Court TV to place a camera in the courtroom.
The rules are that the camera cannot focus on the jurors.
One day we showed up and there's this camera up there, and it certainly changes everything. This is the justice system and Hollywood and showbiz all put together, and that's a pretty bad combination.
Opening day attracted a dizzying assortment of spectators who descended on the Van Nuys courthouse. Girls were lining up at 4 o'clock in the morning and behaving like Lyle and Eric were rock stars. It was the hottest ticket in town. There were only 10 seats for the press. I had one of them. Inside, it was tense and electric as we waited for the brothers to appear.
My first impression was how pale they looked. I couldn't believe it. Their cheeks are sunken in. They looked horrible, and then they were in these sort of pale-colored sweaters to look preppy, and it just even made them look worse.
A boy in a sweater is supposed to be more sympathetic than a grown man in a business suit.
All right, then, I'll now turn to the lawyers, and they may make their opening statements.
We will prove to you that Lyle Menendez planned this murder and then set off to spend the money which he had acquired through the killings of his parents. I remember making an opening statement, going in the bathroom and throwing up, because it was like, there was a lot of pressure.
The evidence Bozanich presented painted a chilling picture. The brothers had killed Jose first. Then they went after their mother.
I always felt horrible for her because she knew her sons were killing her. Jose didn't know. They popped him while he was asleep. She got up and ran around.
Bozanich told the jury that Lyle and Eric had run out of ammunition while Kitty was still alive and moving. They went to their car, reloaded, and came back. Then they walked up to their mother and shot her. The jurors were left with a powerful image, a photograph of Kitty Menendez's disfigured face.
You see this picture I have of her with this one eye, this blue eye staring out, and the other one's gone. It's just the worst thing you can imagine. I mean, you could almost see the reflection of her children in that one good eye.
One of her key witnesses was Eric's best friend, Craig Signorelli. Signorelli said that he and Eric wrote a screenplay together called Friends, about a boy who kills his parents for money.
Kid looks at his inheritance, opens up a will, sees his inheritance, and sees that he stands to gain $187 million, goes upstairs and kills his parents.
But Signorelli's most damaging testimony was that Eric had confessed the murders to him.
Eric said he looked in and saw his parents sitting on the couch, and Lyle swung the door open and shot his father and looked at Eric and said, "Shoot, Mom," and Eric said he shot his mom as she was standing up and yelling.
The courtroom was shocked.
Leslie Abramson hated Craig Signorelli for betraying her client. I had lunch with Craig that day, and he told me that Abramson ran into him in the hallway that morning, looked him right in the eye, and called him something unprintable. When she got him on cross-examination, she ripped into him.
I take it, Mr. Signorelli, that you're no wallflower either. Is that right?
No.
In fact, you got dressed up today to be on camera, didn't you?
No, I got dressed up because... I'm sorry. Can I answer that? Yeah, objection's overruled. Thank you. I got dressed up because I'm in a courtroom and this is my future.
Didn't you guys play mind games with each other all the time?
Yes.
It was an aspect of your friendship, wasn't it?
That's why I said it could have happened to the police. Because I wasn't sure at the time if what he was telling me the truth, and I did not want to be the one to turn him in.
So you didn't know if he was playing a mind game or not?
That's correct.
Abramson had cut down the prosecution's key witness. Next, she would put Lyle and Eric themselves on the stand. Their testimony would rock the courtroom.
By early August 1993, the state's case against Lyle and Eric Menendez had been underway for 2 weeks. Prosecutor Bozanich's star witness, Dr. Jerome Oziel, the psychologist who taped the brothers' confessions, took the stand.
Dr. L. Jerome Oziel.
Bozanich believed that his testimony would show that the murder had been a thought-out plan.
Eric felt a need to commit the murder relatively quickly. Lyle wanted to take some time to plan it out more effectively, to make sure that it was as perfect as could be. And Eric just didn't feel that he could do that.
The key to the case was motive. According to Oziel, the brothers were lying when they said they were afraid of their parents.
They really didn't kill their parents for money, but out of the hatred that they had, in particular towards their father.
Did you ask them why they killed their mother?
Yes, I did.
And what was the explanation given to you?
That the mother was a witness. Yes, he did.
Bozanich seemed to have won at least a partial victory with Oziel's testimony, but the doctor turned out to be a tainted witness because he had been having an affair with a patient of his, Judalon Smith.
Oziel asked his mistress, Judalon Smith, to eavesdrop outside his office door while he talked to the brothers. She heard Lyle threaten to kill him if he revealed their secret. Judalon told me, "I never thought I believed in evil, but when I heard those boys speak, I did."
I don't recall the exact date.
Did your acquaintanceship with her begin with a telephone call from her?
Leslie Abramson went after Oziel's credibility.
How long after you met her at her apartment did you start having sex with her?
I don't recall that.
Did you ever give her drugs?
Absolutely not.
She sued you claiming that, didn't she?
She claimed it.
He was probably one of the most disturbed people in the room when he was, he was a nightmare.
After nearly 4 weeks and dozens of witnesses, Bozanich rested her case. Many observers thought the trial so far had been a soap opera.
All right, well, we didn't forget you.
It was about to become a circus.
I'm going to object.
The most entertaining show on television, and the star performer would be Leslie Abramson.
Leslie Abramson, who in private conversations uses the F word a lot, is best described by a number of other F words: flamboyant, feisty, formidable, and occasionally very funny. Personally, I would rather walk through fire than be cross-examined by her.
Abramson was outspoken with the press.
If it was a last-ditch effort, I knew about it 3.5 years ago.
Aggressive in the courtroom.
Now, if everybody wants to blame me, fine, I'm guilty.
And motherly with her clients.
She would caress him in court or pull lint off his sweater. And, I truly don't know whether that was part of the act to make him look more sympathetic, or she really did feel a lot for Eric Menendez. She loves Eric Menendez.
I think the devil has a special place for her. We had a running commentary between myself, my co-counsel Lester, and the investigating officer. And it was like, okay, you come in the courtroom, you have a gun, you have 2 bullets in the gun. Who do you shoot? The 2 men always said they'd shoot Eric and Lyle. And I always said I'd shoot Leslie twice to make sure she was dead.
What else did you notice with respect to the way that Jose treated Lyle?
Abramson began her case by putting on a parade of teachers, friends, and family who testified that Jose and Kitty were bad parents.
Jose stood up, grabbed him.
Say Eric very strongly, and
You could hear the you can hear the belt
And would you see bruises on
Yes.
the boys after that?
above their thigh area for where a belt would be hit.
But Abramson knew that physical abuse was not enough to justify murder. She had to prove that Lyle and Eric killed in self-defense. Finally, Lyle took the stand in his own defense.
Joseph Lyle Menendez, Menendez.
That was the most dramatic part of the trial, when Lyle took the witness stand. Everybody was waiting to hear from him. What is he going to say, and what is he like?
Between the ages of 6 and 8.
Did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes. He raped me.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Did you bleed?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Very.
When Lyle testified, you could have heard a pin drop. It was devastating. Even I had tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat. Everyone in the courtroom did. But I watched that same moment later on TV, and I realized it was all rehearsed. It was a brilliant performance. He and his brother were world-class liars.
I just told him, I don't.
We were told by the bailiffs that they would get off the stand and high-five each other. Like, great job today in court.
Lyle's testimony changed the tone of the trial. The jury seemed to believe him, and there was little Bozanic could do. Next, it would be Eric's turn, and his testimony, full of explicit sexual details, would be even more shocking. The trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez was in its second month. Millions watched as Lyle described how his father had sexually abused him, and millions had sympathized. Prosecutor Pam Bozanic would have an uphill battle now. On the stand, Lyle said that 5 days before the murder, he had had an argument with his mother.
And she reached and she grabbed my hairpiece. And she just ripped it off.
According to Lyle, Eric had never known about the hairpiece.
I've seen a lot of hairpieces. You do in Beverly Hills. And I have to say, Lyle Menendez's toupee was a masterpiece. I had no idea he was wearing one, but I'm sure Eric did. Those two were very close. They did everything together. But Eric never knew Lyle wore a rug? I mean, come on. Give me a break.
Lyle told Eric he was humiliated that his secret was out, so Eric revealed his own humiliating secret. Jose was still molesting him. Lyle claimed he told Jose to stop molesting Eric, or he'd tell the police and the family. He said his father's response scared him.
He said, "We all make choices in life, son. Eric made his, you've made yours."
Lyle's testimony had changed the course of the trial. Now it was his brother's turn.
Eric Galen Menendez, M-E-N-E-M-D-E-Z.
Now, did something happen?
Under Abramson's sympathetic questioning, Eric painted a picture of long-term, severe sexual abuse.
How long did that go on?
12 years.
How did you feel at 18 about the fact that your father was having sex with you?
I hated it. I hated it. I hated it.
The details Eric offered shocked the courtroom.
And did you come over the years to give those different kinds of sexual incidents names?
Yes.
And would you tell us what were the names that you gave for those different types of incidents?
Knees. Nice sex.
Nice sex.
Rough sex.
Rough sex.
Just sex.
You call that sex?
Yes.
We had reason to believe that Eric may have been gay, and we had actual physical evidence of it. And the reason we wanted to put it in is that, first of all, it's why Jose was upset, and it would explain how he could talk about sex with a man so well.
The prosecution argued that Eric's homosexuality was the key to the crime. They said that Jose had found out and that Eric was afraid he would lose his inheritance.
I assumed that since Lyle was the older brother and had been groomed to be the head of the family, that he was the brains behind it. And after cross-examining him and seeing Eric cross-examined, I figured out that Eric was the brains. That Eric was smarter than Lyle. He was the person who had caused everything to happen.
Anne Wolford.
John Neil Briere, B as in boy,
rape
R.
and sexual assault.
To convince the jury that Lyle and Eric had been telling the truth about the sexual abuse, their lawyers called a string of experts.
Children
The experts that were called into this case were national authorities. They were widely regarded in the mental health community.
Now, what was isolating about the
This
sexual
is our secret. It was the enmeshed incest family secret.
I thought most of them were pretty much prostitutes, but that's what experts do. Did Eric
The
Menendez
prosecution put on no sex abuse experts. They couldn't afford to pay them.
I was basically told to do the trial on the cheap. There was no money. It's just that the defense, had all this money to put into exhibits and experts. So it was pretty overwhelming, basically.
What had started out as the trial of two brothers who had murdered their parents had become a national debate on whether Jose Menendez had abused his sons.
I think that the prosecution was a little taken by surprise at the effectiveness of the defense.
It was the prosecution's opinion that, is so far-fetched that they didn't even dispute it. And I think that was an error.
I remember by November thinking, this jury's going to hang. We've lost our momentum. You could just tell that they got lost.
Jurors are human beings.
By the end of the trial, many were calling Leslie Abramson's defense groundbreaking. Now it was up to the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard all of the evidence and the arguments of the
Eric
attorneys.
Menendez's jury deliberated for 16 days. Finally, they came back deadlocked.
Do you view this as at least a partial victory, despite not knowing everything about the deadlock?
I have very high standards of what's victory. So I don't view a hung jury as a victory, no. It's not a loss, but it's not a win. I mean, you're still in square one, running around in circles.
12 days later, Lyle's jury also came back hung.
It looked like the Menendez brothers had literally gotten away with murder.
The trial was over, but America's fascination with it wasn't. Media outlets were saturated with opinion makers praising and condemning Abramson and what was now called the abuse excuse.
How do I feel? I feel better, thank you. Much less stressed.
On the media circuit, there was no one more visible or vocal than Leslie Abramson, who continued her march to glory and national recognition. For a while, she was everywhere. A lot of people thought she was controlling the media the way she had controlled the trial.
The jurors were also the focus of intense media interest. Abramson took 4 of Eric's jurors under her wing, helping to book them on different TV shows and giving them access to Eric in jail.
After the trial, she had all the women who voted in her favor from the jury over to her house for dinner. And apparently they had a conversation with Eric on the phone that night from jail.
After 3.5 years, Lyle and Eric Menendez had battled the law to what looked like a standstill. But nothing in their privileged backgrounds would prepare them for what would happen next.
The court finds that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked and declares a mistrial in this matter.
The trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez had come to an end with 2 hung juries. The Menendez brothers would have to be retried.
We have an ethical, a professional, and moral responsibility to go forward with this case as a first-degree murder case.
Meanwhile, as Lyle and Eric waited in jail, another Los Angeles murder gripped the nation.
Title action find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime.
O.J. Simpson, accused of murdering his wife Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman, was acquitted with the help of a multi-million-dollar dream team.
In the 80s, Jose Menendez had been an executive at Hertz while O.J. was doing their TV commercials. One night, Jose invited O.J. over to his house for dinner to meet the kids. O.J. and the Menendez brothers didn't see each other again until they were in the celebrity section of the Los Angeles County Jail, all charged with double murder.
I think that the pressure was really on the district attorney's office, but we had lost the O.J. Simpson just before the start of the retrial of the Menendez brothers.
Judge Stanley Weisberg, who presided over the first trial, came back considerably chastened, banned cameras from the courtroom, basically ran a much tighter ship.
Gone were Jose's millions and half the high-priced legal team. Lyle's lawyer was Charles Gessler from the Public Defender's Office. Eric still had Leslie Abramson, but instead of her six-figure fee, she was getting paid $10,000 a month by the state. There was also a new prosecutor, David Kahn, who was not about to let Abramson control the trial. This time, everything would be different.
David Kahn, as well as co-counsel, came on very strong. He was a bullet, a speeding bullet.
Judge Stanley Weisberg refused to allow in the testimony from friends and family members that he had permitted in the first trial. And Lyle Menendez, who had wept as he talked about abuse, did not take the stand.
We had a lot more information that we could use to impeach him, and in essence, he was afraid to take the witness stand. Among the statements was statements such as, "We fooled half the country in the first trial, but now we just have to fool the rest."
And this time, Leslie Abramson made a mistake. She had hired Dr. William Vickery, a psychiatrist, to evaluate Eric in jail. Vickery's notes were helpful, but not helpful enough for Abramson.
It finally came down to, you take these out of your notes or your history, okay? You're off the case. So I made the wrong decision, that I buckled.
Vickery edited his notes, creating a second version. At the trial, a clerical error resulted in the unedited notes landing in the prosecution's hands.
It was during cross-examination that I questioned Dr. Vickery about a difference in his notes and my notes, thinking that there was some rational explanation, only to learn that we were working with two different sets of notes.
On the stand, Vickery was forced to admit Abramson had asked him to change his notes.
I think the courtroom was shocked, the jury was shocked, the judge was shocked, and we were certainly shocked.
That hurt Leslie Abramson's credibility so much that she couldn't give her closing argument.
The brothers' best weapon, their fierce defense attorney, had been defanged. In 1996, almost 7 years after they killed their parents, Lyle and Eric were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lyle and Eric were sent to separate prisons. Both brothers continued to receive hundreds of letters from women who felt sorry for them because they'd been abused. Less than a year after his conviction, Lyle married pen pal Anna Erickson in prison. The marriage was short-lived.
I heard that they got divorced because he was cheating on her by writing love letters to another woman, and the guards found out and sent the letters to the other woman to Anna, so she divorced him.
The brothers have no contact with each other, and Lyle is said to be bitter. Dr. Vickery, the psychiatrist who always believed Eric had been abused, still visits him twice a year in prison.
He said that he felt better than he had in years because it was the first time in his life that he could remember he didn't have to worry about somebody coming into his room at night, beating him up and raping him.
According to Vickery, Eric has not only adjusted to life in prison, but is doing well.
He has thrived incarcerated.
In June 1999, Eric married his pen pal, Tammy Ruth Sackerman, in a prison ceremony.
He's got a very stable marriage where he has a woman that loves him and lives nearby and visits him all the time.
And Eric Menendez now expresses remorse.
He said he felt he had made a terrible mistake. And I said, what was the mistake? And he said, I should have killed myself, not my parents.
We would not be doing a story about Jose Menendez now if he were still alive.
His ultimate reward for being Mr. Big Shot and Mr. Success and having everything his way and doing whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it, he wound up, the king, being killed by the prince, the two princes.
We think that, you know, if we had all the things that the Menendez family had, we would be perfect. And I think that everything that we see as we ride through the streets of Beverly Hills is not as beautiful and manicured as we think it is.
Lyle and Eric Menendez had a terrible childhood, but they also had a choice. They could have walked away. They didn't because they weren't willing to give up the money, and so they'll spend the rest of their lives in prison. That's where they belong. For Court TV, I'm Dominic Dunn.
It was a crime that shocked America.
Did you and your brother kill your mother and father?
They said they were the victims.
My dad had been molesting me.
But what was the real truth?
We had reason to believe that Eric may have been gay.
Their sensational trial changed American justice forever.
Eric and Lyle Menendez clearly killed their parents for greed.
Behind the facade of the American dream, the Menendez brothers, tonight on Power, Privilege, and Justice.
Jose Menendez seemed to have it all. A spectacular mansion in Beverly Hills, a glamorous job in the entertainment industry, and a beautiful family.
They were good looking. I mean, Kitty Menendez was a beauty queen. Jose Menendez was a buff, hot Cuban guy. And their sons were a good mix of the two of them.
They had money, they had power, they lived in a beautiful place, and they had a very promising future.
But on the evening of August 20th, 1989, everything Jose Menendez had achieved was about to come to a brutal and sudden end. At 10 o'clock, Jose and Kitty were just settling down in their TV room with a bowl of ice cream when their two sons burst in. Lyle and Eric fired 13 shotgun blasts into them. 1.5 hours later, the boys returned to the house at 722 North Elm Drive and called the police to report that their parents had been murdered. The scene shocked even veteran police detectives.
Looked like a war zone. I mean, it was one of the worst crime scenes that I'd ever seen.
You would never expect a crime like this in Beverly Hills. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I think they have one murder a year.
I used to live a few blocks away from 722 North Elm Drive. The Menendez house was big and beautiful on the outside, but inside there was nothing but despair, fear, and greed, and the hatred that leads to murder.
The murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez was so violent that at first police thought it might be the work of professional criminals, the mafia or Colombian drug dealers. But gradually, suspicions focused on the two privileged boys at the center of the crime and the dark secrets of the Menendez family. Jose Menendez was born into the elite world of Havana high society. The Menendez family was socially prominent. They were known for their good looks, their athletic gifts, and their brilliance at business. Jose grew up confident that to be a Menendez was to be the best.
There was a drive for excellence and a need to achieve, a sense of entitlement, privilege.
But in 1960, that world of privilege disappeared almost overnight. Revolution was sweeping Cuba, and Jose was sent to live with an aunt in the small town of Hazleton, Pennsylvania.
He came over at the age of 15 years old, and an immigrant, and he just said, "I'm going to make it."
Young Jose was determined to regain what he had lost. A star swimmer in high school, Jose went to Southern Illinois University on an athletic scholarship. There he met a quiet, attractive girl named Mary Louise Anderson, known to her friends as Kitty. She was a straight A student and a beauty pageant winner. She was just what Jose was looking for. In 1963, they married, moved to New York, and started a family. The couple's first child was Joseph Lyle, born in 1968. Eric came 3 years later. While Kitty stayed home with the children, Jose devoted himself to work.
Jose was a driven man. He knew what he wanted and he went after it. Jose was a brilliant man.
Jose rose quickly in business. By 1973, he was chief financial officer at the Hertz Corporation. He was smart, hardworking, and aggressive.
So we think 1989 will be a tremendous year on a pro forma basis. I think we will be very happy with the growth of the company.
I think he believed that he was smarter than most of the people around him. He is a person who was not reluctant to criticize his subordinates in public, and he was extremely demanding.
His hard-charging style paid off. By the time he was 41, he was chief operating officer of RCA Records. The family moved to an estate in Princeton, New Jersey, complete with a tennis court. Lyle and Eric were gifted athletes, and Jose was grooming them to be tennis champions. He enrolled them at the exclusive Princeton Day School. One day, Jose dreamed his sons would go to Princeton University.
I think that what Princeton University stood for, Jose, was the WASP establishment, part of something that was such a dream for him.
But Lyle and Eric weren't good students, and neither seemed to have Jose's drive. Lyle was shy and had trouble making friends. Eric was more social, but he liked being with friends more than studying. But Jose had made himself a success, and he wanted nothing less for his sons.
Nothing would have been good enough for Jose Menendez. He wanted these boys to be his trophies, basically, and to become the best of everything. And if they weren't, he would make them into that.
Jose would often test Lyle and Eric on what they had learned in school, spur-of-the-moment quizzes that could quickly take an ugly turn.
He would sit nose to nose with them, and if they missed any question or they didn't give the right answer, he would shake them.